Taylor Elwood here with Magical Experiments Podcast, and I'm super excited as always to welcome one of my favorite authors, one who I've read a lot and who is a good friend of mine, S. Connolly. And welcome back to the show. Go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you. It's been a while since we've had you on here.
Oh, well, thanks for having me. I am the author of well over 50 books about demonolatry and demonic magic and demonic witchcraft type stuff. So I've been practicing since 1984. So it's 40 years now, which is kind of crazy. Um, I don't know if I ever thought I'd live this long, to be honest. You don't think about that when you're young.
No, you really
So
don't. You think you're immortal. You're like, oh, I'm gonna live forever. And then you
right,
realize, like Highlander, that there can only be one.
right. So yeah, I've been working with demons for a lot of years, and I've been practicing demonolatry specifically, I don't know, since the late 80s. And I was finally like initiated once I turned 18 in 1990. So um, because you have to be 18 for that. Anyway, or when you're going into a group anyway. Um, so yeah, so I've been doing this for a lot of years.
Yeah, you got me beat. I've been doing this for 31 years, so you got me beat by 9 years.
I think
A
am I older than you? I don't know. I might
little bit,
be.
like by probably a few years, yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm not saying.
Right. Yeah. Who won't tell anyone?
We won't tell
You
anyone
can
now.
guess.
Yeah. No, I recently read your book, Alchemy of Goetia. Um,
Hmm.
and I was definitely really intrigued, not the least because I actually also went through your course where we did, it was like the year and a half of working with a demon per week.
Hmm.
So it was really fascinating to me because it was like, oh, like after having taken that course and worked through that and then actually reading the book, I'm like, huh, there are a lot of interesting things here, connections here that I wouldn't have seen at the time. But now that I did that demon a week training, I do. So tell us a bit about your latest and greatest book, Alchemy of Goetia, and what it's about for those people out there who haven't read it yet.
Right. So basically, I've noticed for a lot of years that there were alchemical symbols, like medieval alchemical symbols in the seals of the Goetia. And I never really like connected with them um, in the sense like I do with channeled sigils.
Hmm.
There's a different feeling to them. And so I've known for a lot of years that there was symbolism within the seals, and I couldn't find any books on this. And I was like, you can't tell me that no one has noticed this. Maybe it's like, you have to be umpth degree or something like that in some secret organization in
Don't
order to
forget
like
the
get this
special handshake.
right, have a special handshake so you can like get this information. But I was like, one of these days I'm gonna sit down and go through each sigil and write a book that goes through and like actually where I'm going to actually look for all of these alchemical symbols uh, in these sigils and see what I find. So I finally decided to start it last year. Actually, it was very early last year, maybe even a little bit in the year before. I may have actually started the book in 2022, to be honest.
Hmm.
Just getting together all of the stuff that I needed. Like I needed to find the right sigil set. So I had to find a sigil set that was worked with during the period that the Ars Goetia came into print. So, um, and it's really interesting because, a lot of the lore surrounding the Ars Goetia says that it has Arabic origins, and you can kind of tell as you start going through it. I didn't think so at first. I was like, well, I don't know, maybe that's just a story, but it's actually true. Like the Arabs had like a really rich alchemical tradition. So the Western alchemists likely traveled and somehow got the information and then brought it
Hmm.
um, back with them to Europe and basically started copying all of these alchemical symbols. And of course, Goetia just means witchcraft, right? So um, So basically, it's almost like it's a book of spells, but it's almost like a book of alchemical spells because there's some spiritual alchemy to that, and there's some actual alchemy to go with it. So, like, there was one particular spirit that it was like his sigil, and I can't remember the one right offhand. I should have probably glanced at the book and refreshed my memory before we did this interview, but it was actually a recipe for a cleaning solution, like to keep your lab equipment like clean. So it was that, but it also has other like spiritual ramifications. Do you know what I'm saying?
Oh
So it's
yeah.
like, okay, so here's an actual recipe for an actual alchemical operation or a potential alchemical operation, but there's a spiritual alchemy that goes along with it. And so that's what I was trying to do with the book. Now, I didn't do the work for everyone because first of all, it would have been super graphics heavy and the ebook like wouldn't have been able to handle that. Um, but of course, if anyone reads it and they want to know, they want to see my work, they're more than welcome to contact me and say, "Hey, I'd really like to see how you came up with, Boone, the recipe for Boone. I'd really like to see your work on that." And I could actually like take a picture of my notes because there's so much notes. I mean, I would literally have to scan all of them. And I don't have that type of a scanner to do that, unfortunately. Otherwise, I would just put it up on the website so people could see like all of my messy, messy notes. Um,
Well, and you practice laboratory alchemy, so I mean,
yes.
I mean, I have very limited experience with laboratory alchemy. I knew somebody who, or a couple people who did it, and I learned a little bit about it, but not enough to be like where I could say, like, oh yeah, I know what I'm really talking about. But you
Well,
actually have done that, so I mean, I was really
mhm.
fascinated from that perspective. Did you find that that with these recipes and the symbols and everything that you could actually replicate it in your alchemical laboratory? And if so, like what were some of the things that you discovered as a result?
Well, excuse me. I have not actually done any of the experiments because a lot of them actually require caustic substances. So my laboratory is more in a kitchen, and a lot of the stuff that I do is distillates. I do a lot of distillation, and I do a lot of hydrosols and stuff like that that I make for magic. I grow my own plants, and I use them as
Hmm.
the ingredients to do the alchemical work. But I have been into alchemy for many, many years, and that's how I noticed kind of the correlation because I know all these alchemical symbols from reading all of the books. And here's the thing that's interesting is in magic we seem to separate all of that, especially Western magic, and it's not separate. It's all supposed to be together, but somehow over the years it all got kind of separated. So you didn't have, it's like you didn't have your key of alchemical symbols with the Ars Goetia. So a lot of people will learn the ceremonial magic, but they'll completely just dismiss the alchemy. So that's why I think a book hasn't been written on it before because most people who practice magic, they're over here and they're not kind of incorporating everything. They're not, everything's been separated out, and it wasn't at the very beginning. The very beginning it was all mixed together, but you had to be initiated to know that. You had to understand that. And so having that alchemy background for me, I'm like, there's some experiments I would never ever uh, even attempt because, for example, Astaroth is, making an arsenic gas. That particular recipe makes arsenic gas and can kill you, which is why they say you need to hold the ring to your face so it won't kill you. Yeah, because you don't want to breathe in that gas. You know what I'm saying? So I think the ring was actually a safety device that you needed to wear to keep yourself from breathing in arsenic gas because it would kill you and you could kill the people around you. So you had to be super careful. You had to like have an alchemy lab like out in the middle of nowhere, maybe not even, maybe in open air. So there was good ventilation because otherwise you could have killed yourself. There's a lot of use of arsenic in these recipes.
Yeah.
Um, and just various caustic substances. But I actually like had conversations with friends of mine who were actual chemists when I was going through the recipes, the alchemical recipes. And in some instances they would explain to me like how the process of certain things worked. And so I had to do a lot of research with that too, because a lot of this has to do with like metallurgy and smelting all of this alchemy was the precursor to all of that, and to chemistry. So in that sense, like some of the stuff, like I would have needed a lot more to actually do the experiments, but I also think that you can learn a lot from it on a spiritual level if you look at what all of the symbolism in it means. There's even like animal symbolism that was used in alchemy, like a lot of uh, alchemical emblems tend to have various animals to represent the different parts of the alchemical process. So when you start looking at that too, and then you look at the descriptions of the demons, it's not that those are actual descriptions of the demons per se. It's an actual description of the spiritual alchemical processes. And so you have these two things. You have an actual laboratory alchemy and actual spiritual alchemy working together through a lot of symbolism that it just people didn't know about. So that's one of the reasons I wrote the book, is just because I would recognize symbols and I'm like, that's got to be that's an alchemical symbol. And just wasn't sure how deep it went. And I certainly didn't expect to find actual recipes. So it's really changed my view of the Ars Goetia considerably,
Hmm.
you know, because I started out in my magical career working with the Ducante hierarchy, and only brushing uh, around Goetia here and there, the Ars Goetia. But I was thinking, but I didn't like the way that people commanded the spirits. But then when you start looking at it in an alchemical way, and why people would pray before working with these spirits, because you know it's kind of like kissing your ass goodbye, so to speak. Um you want to say a prayer before you do something dangerous so you don't kill yourself, or you hope you don't kill yourself. So I mean, there's just a lot of things that you have to think about on how that works. But even the names of God are very, very symbolic. The sound, the vibration of of the sounds of the names of God creates an atmosphere, and it brings a certain energy to ritual too. So anymore, I mean, I used to find that offensive, but now as I get older and I learn more and more about magic, and I certainly don't know everything, right? There's so much to learn. I don't think I will ever be able to learn it all before I die.
Same.
Um, but at least I can share with people kind of the things that I see and kind of my worldview. And they can either say, oh, this is really interesting and this will help me in my path, or they can go, yeah, whatever, and toss it onto the fire. I don't care. I, I'm, I write the books that I write to, I don't know, inform the people who are interested. That's really what it comes down to. So no, I haven't done the laboratory alchemy specifically, and I don't know that I would attempt a lot of it. I mean, I think there's one where it's like you add vinegar and borax together as a disinfectant. That's the one I was talking about. And I think it's a demon that starts with a B. Was it Booer, maybe?
Or Babbit.
I'd have to look it up. But there's one of them that
Yeah.
it was an actual recipe for a cleaning solution, like to clean your lab. And I was like, that makes sense. And there's a couple of them where it's like, yeah, it's basically like for courage, like a spell for like courage, where it's like, yeah, take a shot of whiskey. Like literally, that's what I how I took it, how I read those recipes. Now, I could be completely wrong, but I do invite people reading the book to actually, double check my work, get the books that I mentioned to get, and then go through each sigil yourself and write down what you see, because they are alchemical symbols. I mean, there's just no argument about it. I mean, there were a few that because I don't know, I don't have the exact same symbol set. You know what I'm saying? I'm working off of a 1755 manuscript that was of symbols that were in use from 1500 to 1700 or thereabouts in that period. And I may have missed things. There's hundreds of them. There are hundreds of these symbols. So it's like almost impossible to I had to go through each sigil and look through every single page of that book and
Yeah.
the other book. That's what I did. Like I would have a sigil right there, like in front of me, Well, I sat there and flipped through the book. That's why what took me so long to write it.
I can appreciate why I would. I mean, there's a lot of research there. And I mean, I think it really makes sense that, like in our modern age, I mean, I don't know too many people that happen to be laboratory alchemists and magicians.
Hmm.
More often than not, it's people practicing magic, and then, occasionally, I mean, I know, again, there are some laboratory alchemists,
Hmm.
but and it makes sense when like with everything that you were saying, it was interesting even just now listening to you. It was like I could see the connections kind of came even firmer after having read your book. I'm like, oh yeah, this makes even more sense based off of the conversations that I've had. But yeah, for the most part, I think, people wouldn't think of it that way. But it's interesting because I know, like, for example, with or what I recall from laboratory alchemy and talking with a couple of the people is that they did end up doing some kind of prayer or something ahead of time, as part of that process. And like you said, that makes total sense under that context. It's like, oh yeah, I'm about to create some dangerous substances, so I better commend my soul to God because I might be kissing my ass goodbye.
Yeah, so yeah, it was really eye-opening, and of course I'd be like sending emails to my friends like, "Oh my gosh, you know what I just found?" Like, I have another friend who's a laboratory alchemist. I mean, he's so serious that he actually did a whole alchemical setup in his bathtub with sand. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, I can't even imagine cleaning that out." But and he had like, he was planning on doing like an outdoor forge to like do stuff like that. So I know some people who are pretty hardcore serious alchemists, like laboratory alchemists, like they actually do it. And so I was like constantly writing them like, "Oh my gosh, did you see what this means?" and everything like that. And they're just like, "Oh, that's kind of cool," because even they didn't like stop and like make the connection. But then I don't know if most of them were actually into the more ceremonial magic, but um I mean, like I said, usually like, your alchemists are over here, your ceremonial magicians are over here, and they don't really meet as often in the middle as they should, you know?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And this kind of leads to a really interesting question, which is then, can this kind of understanding now, are we even really working with spirits then? Or is this
Right.
just a case of these were alchemical instructions and people just, it was couched in a certain way in order to make it maybe less, I don't know, make it less of a chance that the Christians would get upset or something like that. But but in reality, it's like, oh well, these aren't really spirits after all. Like that was kind of one of the things that went through my mind, and I'm like, huh.
Right.
So with all the work I've been doing, have I really been working with spirits, or have I just been deluding myself here?
Well, now here's the thing. I have several theories on this, and I haven't actually explored it because I'm thinking about actually embarking on the numerology of Goetia
Hmm.
and going in and doing just testing the numerology and see what it has to say and see if it kind of meshes with everything else we know. And I'm wondering if, first of all, like some of the names are actual god names. Like, you have Astaroth, which a lot of people believe arrives from Astarta. Um, and of course you have many variations, many variant names of that particular spirit. Um, Astaroth with a T, and then Ashtaroth with a T. So like, I mean, there's so many, and a lot of the reasons we have all these variations is because people used to rewrite these manuscripts by hand because they would copy them from a teacher. It's not like they were actually printed. I mean, you can look at the Sloan manuscripts and all of the different types of manuscripts that we have of the Ars Goetia, and there will be variants like Gamagen becomes Samagina in another manuscript. So you have like, people either modify or adjust and maybe there's a reason because sometimes you have like two sigils that are very similar, but one kind of says something a little different than the other. You know what I'm saying? Um, so that is a good question. Are we really working with spirits, or were these spells just named after spirits? And a lot of these spirits, like there's no actual like record of them. But who's to say they aren't Arabic jinn? Because hold on a minute, I have a cat trying to get out of the
Oh
out of
yeah,
the
I totally get
And
the whole
he's going
cat
to
thing.
distract me if I didn't let him out. Sorry
No,
about
I get it. I have cats myself. You know, that's they're kind of a reality.
that.
This is what it's
So
like, folks. When you're interviewing other authors and stuff, you know, we have cats sometimes.
there's little brats. Otherwise, he would have just sat there and knocked at the door and would have driven me crazy. So anyway, so are they spirits? Well, some of them could have been Arabic spirits, jinn, because Solomon, uh, the it was actually said that like the spirits of the Ars Goetia were actually jinn, and jinn is a very Arabic thing, right? So if that's the case, then we may not have in our literature, maybe they do in Arabic literature, these particular spirits. And then when you're translating them from Arabic to English, what do you get? You know what I'm saying? Or, and there's another possibility, or are these spirit names actually carefully crafted with numerology in mind? So, I mean, clearly you have some that do have some historical significance in a lot of Western culture and sometimes Eastern culture, whatever, like Baal, for example, or Baal, Bael, instead of Baal. Um, or Belial, for example. You'll find Belial in a lot of early Christian demonology texts. So it's it's interesting to kind of look at the names we do have historical references to versus, you know, spirits like Barbados. And it's not spelled the same way as the actual island country, but it sounds the same. So you have to wonder, okay, like, what were they thinking? Was this some sort of a very selective numerological choice for each of these spirits that they were included? You know what I'm saying? Or
Hmm.
does the spirit that they chose for it represent that process for them? Because we have no idea. We have no idea. We can't go back and talk to the original author of the Ars Goetia.
No, we can't. And if we did, it probably would be like he or she or they, or we'd probably be like,
Right? Well,
what?
and that's another interesting thing too, is like we have to remember that there's always a first person to write it down.
Right.
And so it appears as though these particular recipes were actually passed on from teacher to student. And of course, you would copy your teacher's notes. Still a very common practice in some covens and groups across the United States today. Um,
And
so
that's not even accounting the oral tradition, because for all we know, there was an oral tradition ahead of time where people were memorizing this, and then it
mm,
just happened to get written down because, you know, somebody
right.
decided, hey, it'd be easier to have it written down instead of
But
memorizing it.
but also there was someone who was dedicated enough to do all of these experiments, commit them to memory or to paper, and to encode them so that no one else but those who were initiated could actually understand it. And that's actually the most fascinating thing, because if you look at a lot of the older grimoires, they do have keys to understanding them. There's always a meaning behind the images that are included in a grimoire. If it's an illustrated manuscript or if it has a lot of emblems, there's always a meaning, some sort of numerological meaning behind it. Like our ancestors, like had either way too much time on their hands, or they were just really brilliant. They were not stupid people. They were pretty brilliant as far as being able to encode stuff to keep anyone from suspecting that it was like really kind of a witchy magical practice, you know? I think it was Pope Runyon who actually called the Ars Goetia uh, our own shamanic tradition, even though the Ars Goetia has is heavily Arabic influenced. So, I mean, because I can't imagine why someone in England back in, the 1600s or whatever, late 1500s, early 1600s, would add camels really to to descriptions of spirits if they'd never actually seen a camel. You know what I'm saying? Like they were not actually there. And you do get a lot of like camel imagery
Well, and you look
Um,
at like the name, like for example, Baal or Baal, and then
mhm.
Ashtaroth. I mean, that is clearly originating from the Middle East. So,
Right,
there's that aspect too. So it's not yeah, it's not really much of a stretch to say that that's really where it comes from. But yeah,
right.
that makes sense.
So there you go. I mean, that's pretty much that answer in a nutshell, hopefully.
Well, and I mean, I think I mean, I can safely say in the years that I've been practicing and connecting with the Goetia and the spirits of the Goetia that I have definitely had some type of spirit contact with the spirits. I mean, even
Mhm,
doing the 72-week Goetia process through your class was a
mhm,
great example of that. I mean, each week I'm working with them and I'm having meaningful contact with each of them, getting to know them, and that's aside from the ones that I had already worked with before that. So I think, like it what it illustrates though is that there is so much more information to discover. What I liked about your book was I was like, oh well, this just provides another valuable layer of correspondence and things to think about and to consider and to
mhm.
really cross in and to compare experiences where I'm like, oh, this experience with Agaris, for example, in terms of Agaris being being able to make friends, but also being, creating earthquakes. Well, how does that match with that alchemical recipe, or for that matter, when once you've done the research on the numerology, it'll be fascinating to see that as well. But it's like,
Mhm.
there's something to be said for like having that sense of curiosity and wonder, and at the same time also being able to say, okay, I've had these experiences, and I can trust that this is that in whatever capacity I'm able to work with these spirits, this is really real.
Yes. Well, absolutely. I do believe that the Goetia spirits, the spirits of the Ars Goetia are actual divine intelligences. I do believe they do exist in some realm, whether it's the spirit, you know what I'm saying? They exist as individual entities. And I believe they have wisdom to offer us for sure. Because I had experiences too, like just like any other demonic force that exists out there, no matter what hierarchy you're working with, I still find that there are certain Ars Goetia spirits I have a natural attraction to, and others I'm just kind of like, meh, you know? And then it's interesting to like take that and say, well, what about that spirit is actually like attracting me? What is it about me that finds that attractive? And then you look at all of these layers of meaning as you're saying, as you said, there are many different layers. There's the layer that we're almost familiar with, which is let's take this literally. And this is, this is what this is. And they're demons, and they're Christian demons, no less. Um, or in a Christian sense, you know what I'm saying? Like they're devils, like, um, and or you can look at it as, okay, more on a demonolatry end of things. They're not devils, but they are divine intelligences. And then you can look at it as an alchemical sense, like, and they rule over these particular alchemical processes that maybe those processes actually work in the context of finding friends or causing earthquakes. Or like earthquakes could be one thing our ancestors loved were metaphors. So earthquakes, that could be like, kind of shake things up in your world, kind of get things moving, throwing opportunities at you, or some sort of upheaval in your life, that's maybe meant to get rid of false friendships and bring new friendships in, or what, you know what I'm saying? So there's
Oh
like
yeah.
so many layers there that you can look at. So I am really interested to see if the numerology adds to that. So it should be really fascinating, actually. I think I could probably I decided to like call all of the books on the Ars Goetia that I've written, like my Goetia series. And I've been thinking, like, who knows? Who knows? And once I get through the numerology, maybe I'll discover something else and I'll have to write like another book to that. You know what I'm saying?
Hey, I get it. I'm a serial book writer myself. There's always something new to write. I mean, I'm actually getting ready to write my book on working with demonic spirits, where I kind of share my system and process. And I'm, of course, naturally will be referencing your work. I actually have a good section of the bibliography that has already been, has S. Connolly, da, 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 like, because I think that it's just I mean, you've contributed some really important work out there. I mean, I'd say to anyone who watches my channel here that, like, if you're really interested in understanding how to work with demonolatry in general and stuff, that I can't think of a better teacher or practitioner,
Well,
or
thank you.
author other than you. I have so much respect for your work and what you've shared, because it's invaluable. And I mean, I think it's really awesome to see where someone is able to dedicate that much toward a specific system. I'm not like that. I dip
Mhm.
across multiple systems, but I've gotten so much of value out of your system and how I approach that kind of work, and it's definitely played a heavy influence on my own work with demonolatry as a
Well,
result.
thank you. I'm glad that I'm always glad to hear when my work inspires somebody, because that's how I feel. That's how I feel like I write my books to inspire others. But also I tend to write as a means to kind of explore ideas and to understand what I'm thinking. Does that make sense? Like to organize my thoughts
Yeah, no, I
and
totally
just
get
put it all
that.
together. So sometimes, when I write books like this one, especially with the Alchemy of Goetia, um, I was writing it initially for my own benefit to see if I had something. You know what I'm saying? Because I wasn't even sure when I started. I was like, for all I know, this could be completely fruitless. Um, and initially I kind of thought it was, but it was good. It was good. I think a lot of people will be sad that I didn't do the work for them, though, because I did not go through and like write down like each alchemical symbol with the thing next to it. I just tell you what it was, and there were some people who were not too happy about that.
Well, and that's where it's kind of like, if you want to do the work, then do it yourself, because you're going to discover something about it for yourself. And
Right.
that's where we can't, that's kind of one of the things that I always find interesting. It's like, well, I want you to do the work for me. Well, okay, if you want to hire me, sure. Pay me a consulting fee, and I'm more than happy to do that work for you, because that's going to take some time. But,
Yeah.
otherwise, be prepared to put that time and effort yourself and see what you can discover. Because, I mean, there really is, there's really something essential about magical work in general. And I know you totally get this, but it's like, each person has to do their own work in order to truly make the magic their own. And it's the same with the relationships with the spirits. It's why I never rely upon the correspondences that somebody else provides automatically. I look at them, I compare them, I'll do some work around them, and I'll find out if the correspondence really does or doesn't mesh with my system of understanding and work, because there is such a personal layer to this. So, I mean, to those
Hmm.
people who are kind of disappointed, my response to that is like, hey, this is your see this as an adventure. This is your opportunity to do that work yourself. Here's somebody who's given you a key,
Hmm.
and now you have something that you didn't have before, but you still have to do the work.
Right. Right. And that's exactly how I looked at it was. And I also went through, I also looked at like the Grimorium Verum and the Grand, looked kind of at the Grand Grimoire and all of those some of the other grimoires too. And that was all alchemical symbolism too. And I didn't like go into detail with those. I just grabbed a select few and was like, okay, so I see these symbols in here just looking at them. But I didn't go through and like completely um, decipher each and every one. And the reason for that was just to give people an idea so they can actually go into the work themselves and look at it themselves. Because I agree with that. I think there is something to be said about doing some of the work yourself, because I think you not just learn more, but you actually experience it and internalize it more. And I think it's more beneficial overall because it like completely changes your understanding. You can read a book and you can know something, but in that sense, you haven't experienced it, and you haven't really, like, I don't know, gained the wisdom from that. I
Yeah.
mean, there is wisdom to be gained, but it's not a deep wisdom.
Yeah. I mean, and if I had like a working alchemical laboratory and everything else, I probably would try some of this stuff, albeit very carefully, but I don't. So, I mean,
I will
for
try
me,
the
it's kind of
cleaning
like, but it's
solution.
like, okay, even with that, I could still, I still read the book and I'm like, okay, what can I take from this? And that's what I started exploring. And so, I mean, there's a lot to explore there without having a laboratory alchemy
Mhm.
setting. And I mean, I mean, I frankly would love to hear it from someone who does laboratory alchemy if they end up trying to do anything like with that. I'd love to hear about it. I'm sure you would too. But
Yes,
regardless, there's so much there.
right. Well, I would try the cleaning solution. I would definitely try that. That seems easy enough, some vinegar and some and a couple other more easily obtained ingredients, because I think that would be the hardest part on doing the actual alchemies, because a lot of the substances would be hard to source, I think. Because I mean, I guess you could get arsenic in rat poisoning. So, I mean, there's that, but I don't want to be like, you know, uh blamed for anyone trying any of those experiments.
No, 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 no. I mean, and that's where we'll say this now. Disclaimer: if you choose to do this work, this is on you. That is your responsibility. You are taking that on as a grown ass human being, and you can take the risks with the full understanding that you are knowingly taking them on because you've made that decision as an adult. Thank you
Right.
very much. Disclaimer put in. So there you go. I think legally your ass is covered now.
Right. Oh, yeah, I put a disclaimer in the front of the book too, like, I don't recommend trying this at home.
It's amazing though. I mean, really, like with anything, I mean, I would also really say that, like just magical practice in general, like we don't do this work because it's quote unquote safe. We do this work to transform our lives, and there is
Mhm,
necessarily some danger. It's interesting. At the time of this recording, I went through this workshop because it was a special training, but one of the facilitators there, he made the point. He's like, this work isn't safe, and yet we do everything to make it as safe as possible. But there is just some reality that sometimes you're going to do this work, and it's going to, bring stuff up, and but that's part of the point because you're doing this to change and transform your life. And I think that's true with magic as well. And like with anything, it's like, be prepared to go into that. With the case of laboratory alchemy, yeah, there's just an added level of danger.
right. But even so, I mean, I think there might be some intrinsic danger to doing the spiritual alchemy with the spirits too. Like, if something is caustic and there's like a warning in that Goetia recipe, then chances are it's also warning you that the spiritual process that you are about to embark on, or the self work that you're about ready to do, can be rather challenging and difficult, and it could be painful, and it could be dangerous
Yeah.
mentally. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, having worked done a lot of work with demonic magic in the last couple of years, and in part because I was taking your course, and in part preparing to write my own book, and I'd already done this work before that. I mean, I'd have to say that definitely I noticed that it was like every time I did, I'm like, need to be aware that, but I think that's true in general. Like if you
Mhm.
work with angels, for example, same thing.
Oh,
You work with other
absolutely.
spirits, like it's not. And it it kind of fascinates me sometimes that people want to have their cake and eat it too, but they're
Mhm.
not willing to really do and understand like, okay, here's the level of work that's involved where it's going to change your life. Like if you
Mhm.
invite change into your life, then own it. Take
Right.
responsibility for it and own the fact that sometimes that change is going to be painful and hard. It's not always easy.
Right. Well, and that's where I think, like, a lot of demons have gotten such a bad rap anyway, right? Because, you're working with, say Zagan to turn something to its opposite, and like your life suddenly just falls apart. Of course, people are like, "Oh my gosh, this evil demon's doing this to me." It's like, no, if you were working with this demon for this change, then this is what needs to happen. This is part of the process of what needs to happen in order to change something to its opposite. You know, it's like you are actually adjusting things. Now, I believe, um, if memory serves, like I said, I didn't review the book again before, like memorizing all of this stuff is like completely impossible. But Zagan turns things into the opposite, into its opposites, and that's kind of what the recipe is about too. That particular alchemical recipe. That particular alchemical recipe actually is about changing one metal into another. So you are basically like turning something into something else. And whenever you do that, there is always the potential that the old has to be burned down so you can start fresh from the beginning. And yeah, so I mean, and that goes with spiritually, and that, when you do something like that with metal, they have like these caustic substances that would dissolve certain metals or components, or a lot of it was like silver plating, a lot of gold plating, silver plating type recipes are in there. So, how to change lead into gold, for example. Apparently you can do this with plating or whatnot. And yeah, it's like a painstaking process, but like, also, if you think about that on like a spiritual level, like, how do you change yourself to be that gold? You know what I'm saying? If you're lead, that's the example that I'm using here. I don't know if that's like a fitting example, but you know what I'm saying? It is. It's a matter of just sitting there, trying to figure out how to do this process with yourself, how to change things about yourself to give you that extra shine that you want, you know, and to change the substance of who you are. So,
Yeah. And so, I mean, what are you willing to transform? I mean, I always say that, like with magic, that it's not just about getting an external result, it's about changing the reality of who you are, your identity. And
mhm,
one of the common reasons I don't see results stick is because people haven't done that inner work to change themselves. So they get a result for a little while and then it goes right out of their lives. And they're like, well, why did it go out? Well, you didn't do the internal work to change.
mhm,
And so you weren't ready for it. And so now it's gone. And like
right.
the stuff that really sticks, it's usually because that person has done the necessary internal work on themselves as well as doing the work in the world around them. And there really is a match there, you know? I mean, and that's actually the essence of spiritual alchemy. I mean, that's definitely been my experience with the spiritual and the psychological aspects of alchemy, which I have done, and energetic, which I have done a lot of work with.
Mhm,
That there, that very much plays an essential role, is that change of identity. So, I mean, when we work with demonic spirits, like I've worked with Gusian, for example, and Gusian is all about truth. Well, one of the things that I've discovered in the last couple of years is I've had my feet held to the fire in terms of becoming a lot more truthful, a lot more assertive, a lot more confident, because it's like these codependent people-pleasing behaviors are simply not going to do. Well, if they're not going to do, then that's kind of the change that occurs. You're going to have some painful experiences though, because you're necessarily going to have to be forced to look at the ways that you have not been in integrity with yourself. And that's just one
mhm,
example of working with a demonic spirit, in this case, Gusian, because Gusian is all about truth.
mhm. Yep.
Well worth it, by the way, folks. I'll just say, like, I am a much happier and more satisfied person, but did I have to do some hard work? Yeah, that's just kind of the reality of things. And I think that, like,
Mhm,
if you're going to practice any kind of magic, you have to be willing to say, like, well, what am I willing to change about myself, as much as I want to change around the world around me.
right. And people often say, well, but how is that going to change? How is that going to change the world around me? Well, when you present yourself as a changed person, or you gain a new perspective, the world looks a lot differently and people react to you differently based on that. And that's how, I don't know, how life gets easier and more controllable as you learn how to do this shadow work and this inner work, you know? And I think that's one of those things, like the inner work, it just never ends. It's like once you finish one thing, it's not like you become like a perfect person. Then it's just you find another thing that you need to work on. You know what I'm saying? I mean, you know this.
Oh,
Um,
I totally know that. I mean, yeah, I mean that's just the thing. Like doing shadow work, it is not, it's a not, it's a never-ending process. And I think the people who want a spiritual bypass or otherwise stick their heads in the sand, like they're not doing themselves or anyone else any favor. It's like you can present yourself as someone who practices magic or whatever else, but like your magic isn't going to be very effective if you're not willing to continually do that work. And
right,
of course, there's times where it's hard. I mean, that's just part of life. Welcome to the reality. But I mean, I've seen so many people where they've denied that aspect, and their lives haven't gotten any better. If anything, they've
mhm,
just kind of gone wandered on a blind little trail and fooled themselves. And it's like that's not getting anywhere either. So I would
right,
rather at least incrementally improve my life. It may not be exactly ideal, but still it's an incremental improvement. I'll take that over
right.
continuing to stay in the same rut.
Yes. So yeah, it's definitely interesting. And if and when I do try some of these experiments, because some of them actually, I take that back. I have tried at least one of those experiments because I have taken a shot of something when I
Mhm.
needed to, like, okay, I need a shot of courage because that is what one of those recipes is down a shot. I think we've all done that one at least once.
Oh
So,
yeah.
I mean, uh, not that I'm saying that, the certain demonic forces are promoting alcoholism. They're just saying, okay, just, you know, uh, brace yourself here, brace yourself, take a shot of this and just deal with it. Um, so yeah, I'm gonna see if I can try at least like the cleaning solution. I want to see how good it cleans. I I'm curious how it compares to like, some of our modern cleaning components.
Oh, I will be really curious to hear about that. Speaking of that, I mean, I know you mentioned the numerology, but what are some of your upcoming projects?
So the numerology of Goetia, that's probably a few years out yet because I have other things. Like right now, we have a kitchen witch cookbook that I wrote with my friend S. Amanda. And that was supposed to come out this summer, but we had a hard time finding someone to format it. But I finally found someone. It's just that she won't be able to get to it until October.
Mhm.
But the other option was doing it myself, and I wasn't able to get to it until November. So I figure October is better than November. So I'll probably have, and plus she would have done, she's going to do a much better job than I would do. Um, so there will be that coming out. And then, so that should be hopefully coming out in late October or early November, just in time for Yule
The
and the
holidays.
solstice.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then um we're doing a Ducante immersion class in my Patreon right now. And I'm going to do the same thing where I kind of turn that into a pathworking book for people. It's
Mm.
just so they have ideas and kind of gives them more of a sense of a demonic force because I really do think the immersion classes are super helpful. People seem to like them. And then next year, I'm going to start working on an intuitive tarot uh, class that will eventually turn into a book. But I have a servitor book coming out next year. And we were working on Four Demon Kings, myself and JC Desazari. But unfortunately, JC has had like so much going on in her life this year, and I've had so much chaos that we just kind of put it on the back burner for now. So I have a lot of projects in the works. It's just that none of them are done yet.
I totally resonate with that.
So I'm hoping that there will be more. I have some fiction I have to get out. I'm actually working on two contracted horror novellas
Oh,
uh
cool.
that I wrote for a project that a publisher was doing. So I'm kind of excited about that. I have one more to write. One is finished, and to my editor. I have another one that has to be done by November 1st, and I just started that. So So it is, it's kind of a balance. I've got, you know, I have all my magical work and everything and my daily practice and all of that. And then I have my writing books based on all of that. And then I have, and, you know, and study and everything and research. And then on top of that, I have the fiction writing. So it makes for a bit of a chaotic mess because I always have like 4 or 5 projects going at the same time.
Yeah, no, I get it.
So,
I totally get it. So, any final words of wisdom for us today?
um, I would say my final word of wisdom for the day is just jump into it and research it. If something interests you or you think that there might be some merit to something, not only should you research it and talk it over with maybe a close magical friend or, you know, just write out your thoughts in a journal, but actually like try to experiment with it magically and see if your thoughts or your hypothesis or anything um has any merit to it because you never know what you're going to find. So,
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's great. Well, I want to thank you for making some time for me today and coming on the show again. It's been a little while, and I'm really happy to discuss your latest work and excited about everything that you brought into it. You did a magnificent job. I certainly got a lot out of it, and I hope that people who read it will do their own due diligence, do some of the work with yourselves, and see what you discover.
well, thank you.